Hello and good morning, I'm Morgan Donner, and as I'm sure you have heard, Joann's, the major fabric store company in the US, is closing down all 800 plus of its stores, which I'm just gutted. Where am I gonna get all the fleece fabric that I use for all my outfits now? I'm just kidding, although I do actually happen to have some fleece fabric from there that I got a while back that, you know what, for the vibes of the video, why don't we go ahead and turn it into a quick little outfit funsies. All right, as it turns out, a fleece is actually pretty great for an outfit. I'm literally wearing a blanket. Like, it's super comfy and cozy and also kind of cute. All right, back to Joann's. Since they're closing down, I figured that the next time I happen to be nearby anyway, I should stop on in, see if I can stock up on thread or other notions that might be handy, just since I happen to be thinking about it anyway. And when I finally did, something kind of magical happened. I walked into Joann's and felt inspired. I wandered all the aisles, I touched a bunch of fabric, and I decided we're gonna do one last project, one last job before we retire, before we say goodbye to Joann's for the foreseeable future. I wonder if people went to Toys R Us for one last toy or Blockbuster for one last movie. Anywho, I walked in and I realized that I wanted the store to inspire me, which is funny because that's not how I normally do this. Normally, when I go into any kind of fabric store, I have a costume very specifically in mind, and I'm on the hunt for something that matches that vision. And this time I decided I'm gonna see what jumps out at me saying, make me into something. I saw a lot of very, very cute fabric, including, yes, a lot of fleece. Oh my God, is that Pokemon? I ended up picking out a couple different things, like this really striking patchwork denim situation and some super cute embroidered hearts on cotton. I looked over the buttons and got a few cute sets from over there that were calling my name. I got this cute rainbow thread that I think will be really fun and striking to top stitch something with. I feel like this is accidentally becoming a haul video. That is not my intent. To that end, I knew that I wanted to engage with the wonderfulness that is just following a pattern. So I moseyed my way on over to the pattern section. I really love looking through the books in particular, and I found a few that caught my eye. Although one in particular, because of that denim fabric that I saw earlier, I found some denim vintage overalls that I thought would be a natural match to go together. With my goodies in tow, I ran on home and then immediately made a mock-up. I will say that while I am glad that this is a modern reproduction of a vintage pattern, because it means that it comes with a lot of the modern conveniences, very clear pattern lines with really distinctly drawn out darts and notches and everything. It's all in there and easy to see, versus the vintage style of pattern tends to be harder to read. That does come with the downside of it's not actually like a true vintage shape anymore, even though Simplicity, the same maker, is the one who theoretically would have made the original 1940s, version of this. It no longer, like, they've tweaked and modernized enough pieces of it bit by bit, and there's actually a lovely YouTuber named Stephanie that has a whole series about true vintage versus reproduction patterns, and I will link to her down below so you can check that out. She even has one on this specific pattern, and they're close-ish. If it is a big deal to you to try and be a little bit more accurate to the period version of the pattern, go check that out. I love going for that historical, accurate, reproduction kind of vibe for sewing. That can be so much fun sometimes. This time, I'm just gonna do the pattern as is, make things easy on myself. Although if you are a fan of vintage type things, then you might want to check out a cute vintage themed video game called June's Journey, who are kindly sponsoring today's vintage sewing adventure. It's about this really clever 1920s detective named June Parker, and in the game you hunt with her for clues and hidden objects in these really beautifully illustrated 1920s themed scenes. Each new scene unravels part of a mystery that she's investigating, and it's really fun to watch the story unfold. It's not all about like crime investigation, it's Also stories about her family, her relationships, betrayal, love, you know, the good stuff. And they add new chapters every week, so there's always more story coming out. They also give you a cute little home island to decorate, which my favorite part is the monthly seasonal items that they have, just because they're very cute sets. Adventure with June and download the game by using the link in my description or this handy dandy QR code. June's Journey is free to download. You can play it on iOS, at PC, Android mobile devices. June is a cool kid. Well, I mean, she's not a kid. She's absolutely a fully grown adult. But what I mean is she's very cool and competent and just really nifty as a protagonist character for the game. I dig it, and I think you might too. So go check that out. Although as cool as June is, she is not going to help me out with this pattern situation. That kind of falls on me. This is not June's journey. This is Joann's journey. All right, let's get to business. For making the mock-up, the first thing I did was, of course, take out the pattern itself. I unfolded all of those tissue sheets and ironed them nice and smooth, which is a handy tip if you didn't know. Iron that tissue paper. It makes it so much nicer and smoother. I thought about cutting out the pattern, but I figured I have this Swedish tracing paper, which is part paper, part fabric, and it's like semi-sheer, which makes it easy to trace out the pattern piece in whatever size you're aiming for and transfer all of the different marks, like labeling the piece, what number it is, how many to cut out, all the different notches and stuff like that. Like, you can transfer all of that to this paper piece and keep the original pattern completely intact. I traced all the different pieces and then cut them out of the patterning paper fabric as well as the actual fabric and stitched that all up into the mock-up you see now. I did find it kind of delightful that the flannel had this like little red barn on it, which looks not unlike what I see literally right outside my own windows. I had just barely enough room left on the fabric to make this black waistband, which I think looks lovely. The downside of using flannel for my mock-up is that this is a stretchy material and the denim is not. It did give me enough information to indicate that I probably do want to size up one for the final version. Unfortunately, the pattern that I bought, I was already using the largest size in the pattern, which meant that I had to go buy a second pattern. I thought about just making the pattern I already had bigger. I did. I thought about it, and then I decided no. So now I have two of the same pattern. That's just where we are. At least the first one is completely uncut, which means that hopefully I can find a friend who wants it and it's completely intact and usable. That said, I did not feel like doing the Swedish tracing paper situation again. Nope. For the actual round, I just cut the actual pattern, and that's okay. I ironed the tissue paper again, because this is a new pattern, and I also ironed the actual fabric that I'm going to use, because that's what you do. Unfortunately, this made me discover that my iron is not doing good. I think my iron is broken. It's emitting a lot more water than it should. One benefit, though, of committing to actually cutting out the paper pattern is that instead of cutting the pattern exactly to the size that I wanted, I cut it a little bit generously, not carefully at all, just around, and then I placed it on the fabric and cut through the pattern paper as well as my fabric pieces all at the same time. You gotta go kind of slow and careful, but I do feel like it saves time over cutting all three pieces separately. I did indulge myself a little bit when shopping at Joann's because I got something that I tried years ago and felt like I didn't know how to use it right. So it's tracing paper, not the sheer kind, but like it's like a wax tracing paper that you use a rotary wheel with, and it marks anything that's touching that wax paper when it gets pressure. Also, Mr. Morgan Donner is doing some sort of cutting today, so if you hear construction-y noises in the background, that's what's going on. What you do is you can put it between the two layers of fabric with the wax side out, and then you trace over, in this case, the dart with a rotary wheel, and it should now mark the wax via pressure to all the necessary layers. It works okay, to be honest. Like, it was visible, but something that I had to kind of really look, depending on what color of fabric was underneath it. I tried a few different colors of the wax paper, but needless to say, I did end up often just using a normal fabric pencil to mark the darts and stuff. It was fun to play with, at least. Now for sewing the darts, I connected the two edges of the dart seam together, at first by pinning and then by doing kind of a thread basting situation. I get bored so easily. I'm like always changing how I'm doing something, even in the middle of doing it, just to keep it fun and fresh. I do actually really quite like thread marking though, or thread basting, because it's, one, you don't have a bunch of pins poking you. It's also, in this case, really easy to use the thread to go just inside of the line that I've marked for the darts, and then I bring it over to the sewing machine and I sew just outside of that line. That way you don't have any of that basting thread accidentally showing through to the outside. It's completely contained on the inside of the garment and just super handy. To finish off the dart, I did make sure to leave the thread of the point extra long rather than cutting it short, because I didn't do the back and forth stitch like I'll often do on sewing a seam. Instead, I just went through the dart and then left it long, and then manually knotted those two threads together, and then used a needle to put the remainder of the thread back in through the dart so that it's tidy, it's contained, it's as like non-bulky as possible at the point, which can not look great if it's super bulky. It's kind of a thick fabric, so it doesn't matter as much, but on really like fine fabrics, I believe this is the way that you want to do it. I then ironed the dart towards the center front and center back, as per the pattern instructions. I feel like there's something really fun about following a pattern where you have all of the instructions laid out there for you, and then you construct it as per the instructions. It's very similar to me to building a Lego from a kit, where you do step 1, step 2, step 3, and ta-da, you've made a thing. And when you do it successfully, you feel very successful. Continuing to follow the directions, I made a little pocket piece, which they use a kind of interesting decorative front facing piece. Instead of the facing being on the inside, like it's purposefully towards the outside. And I used one of the squares, because this fabric is made up of squares. I used one of them to kind of provide some really interesting contrast to that section there. I also pattern matched the rest of the pocket for giggles. A lot of modern jeans construction will use felled seams, which is great because it locks the raw edges inside of each other. Fantastic, super clean and lovely, but kind of bulky, and I felt like this fabric was thick enough that I just didn't wanna. When it comes down to it at the end of the day, I decided that instead I would go ahead and kind of do like a fake or false serged edge. I have this stitch on my machine that is not at all a serged edge, but it kind of uses the same purpose. It works, but it is slow. It is so slow. Anyways, I serged all around all the edges of the pants pattern pieces so that I could then start sewing them together. I matched up the right sides and the left sides, and then sewed the inseam first. Then I opened the right side and the left side and put them on top of each other so that I could sew the U part of the undercarriage. You know the part I mean. I sewed that up. Lastly was sewing up the side seams, leaving kind of this section unsewn because that's where the button placket is supposed to go. You want to keep it available. Now, I did decide that one pocket for the front, an insufficient number of pockets. There needed to be more pockets. So I thought about maybe putting in kind of your more typical jean style pocket. However, doing more patch pockets on the back very easy. I didn't do the decorative facing thing again though, just because it felt like extra work for not enough payoff. Instead, I just rolled the top edge twice, called it good, popped them on. Looks great. The pants portion of the outfit is pretty much done at this phase, so I started working on the top half, the bib portion of the overalls. I cut out the back piece and the front piece. The front has 2 more darts. I tried using the tracing paper again. I ended up just retracing it with the marking pencil again. Then I sewed the front piece and the back piece together and ironed that seam nice and flat. Next up was the straps, and I did end up deciding against the bust pocket because I in fact did it on the mock-up here, and it was weirdly like kind of off to the side in a what seemed to me like a very strange location, even though I was following the pattern. I decided I didn't like it. I seam ripped it off. I still think it might be kind of cute, maybe in the center front here. The straps are nice and easy though, because it's just a single piece that gets folded in half and then stitched all the way along one side and at one end. Then I trimmed off the excess from the end, just because that's going to make it turn a lot easier, in addition to snipping off all the corners, getting rid of as much excess fabric as we can in a kind of tight turn radius. Then I flipped them both right side out, and I found a pair of these like really long needle nose type pliers to be really handy for this, because I could reach in, grab a bit of fabric and pull it out. I ironed the straps nice and flat and lovely looking, and then I pinned them to the front of the bodice, sandwiched between the bodice itself and the facing. The facing, by the way, is made up of the same fabric as the outside, as well as some iron-on interfacing, which I don't use very often, so it's kind of like a little treat when I do. It's something fun and different. I did end up doing another round of false serging to the inner edge of the facing. I could have double folded it, but because it's on like those sharp angles, the serging makes it easier, and the iron-on interfacing, I don't fully trust it to keep those raw edges in check. Next up is the waistband, which consists of 2 pieces. An outer piece made of the same fabric as everything else, so it matches and looks nice. And then for the interior waistband, I used a really thin but very sturdy black cotton just to help reduce the amount of bulk that was in a otherwise pretty bulky seam going on. I stitched the blue side first and kind of gently eased the bodice fabric into the waistband, and I stitched that seam just shy of the proper full seam allowance, so that then I could do the black waistband, and I did that at the full seam allowance through all the layers. It's kind of nice because that way you don't have to worry about lining up the blue waistband and the black waistband and the bodice piece all in one step. You kind of break it down to sub-steps before attaching subsequent pieces. It's kind of nice. Now it's time to attach the whole top half of the pattern to the bottom half, the pants half of the pattern. And I did that by sewing the blue waistband first, again, just by machine, easy. And then for the interior black waistband, I went ahead and folded it under and hand stitched it closed, just using the seam as my guideline for where to stitch so that it wouldn't be visible on the outside. Normally I would use a matching thread. That's kind of the normal way to go about this, but I wanted it to be a little bit more visible for you guys to see, so I used like this big white thread. It's fine. Now that the waistband is in place, we can go ahead and go back to the facing that we had slightly abandoned earlier, and we're going to do some understitching as per the pattern instructions. I kind of forget that understitching exists. Like, it's helpful to do a pattern every once in a while because it kind of reminds me that that's a tool that I can totally use in my arsenal, and it's really nice when you do it. I just don't think to. So the way understitching works is that when you normally sew an inner and outer fabric together, they're gonna kind of stick up evenly in the end. But if you go ahead and sew through the facing and the seam allowances together, just a scooch in from the previous original seam, and then you go back to everything being on the outside. Now the exterior fabric kind of pops up a little bit and covers that visible edge of the interior fabric, which is really nice because if your facing or your lining doesn't perfectly match the color or pattern of the exterior, you don't have this like visible edge peeking out on the outside, like where it's not desired. It just makes things very tidy and neat in a way that's very satisfying. Now, while patterns are totally helpful because they make little tricks like that kind of re-enter my consciousness, it's also kind of fun to deviate from the pattern. For example, the original pattern had buttons for the side seam here, and I decided, no, we're gonna do a zipper. I feel like zippers are so fussy to sew, but if I'm really careful about basting everything in and lining up all the seams and getting everything just as absolutely tidy as possible during the sewing process, the end result is at least passable. I think I did it. I stitched it to the facing first, which gave me a little bit more flexibility and not having to, kind of like the waistband, right? Rather than sewing the waistband and the bodice and the inner waistband all in one go, I stitched the facing to the zipper and then the facing to the exterior. Make sense? Now, while I don't need buttons anymore for the side seam because I put a zipper there, I do still need them for the straps at the back where they crisscross over. I bought absolutely way too many buttons and had too many options to pick from. I really kind of sat here thinking, what buttons do I want to use? I ended up going for the flowers though because they're cute, they're sunshiny, they're bright, they're going to match so many of my shirts. It's a good choice. I marked them in place, and then for the straps I made sure to do a couple test buttonholes because they are relatively big buttons and they in fact did not fit the first few test buttonholes I did. Eventually I landed on a size that worked and then stitched the buttonholes to the actual straps. Usually I'll use a seam ripper to open the buttonhole after I've sewn it, but I couldn't figure out where my seam ripper had gone at the time, so I used a slightly rusty knife. It was fine, it worked. With our buttonholes done, our buttons sewn on, the top half completely finished, last actually is the cuffs at the bottom of the pants. I saved those for last because I wanted to be able to try it on and see how much of that length I would need to cut off. Like, I knew they were too long, and they were too long, but I decided to cut off 3 inches from the end, and then I false serged the edge again. Can I just say, this project has really made me wish I had a serger. Like, it's fine. I've gotten along without one for a long time. I've wanted one for a long time, but I'd be like, I don't need it, so I don't get it, and then sometimes I really wish I had one. Let me know, those of you out there who have a serger, do you like it? Do you use it? Do you regret getting it? Or are you like, no, it's the best? Like, let me know what you think of your serger situation. Back to business though. I went ahead and cuffed the bottom edge to match the pattern instructions because it has like a cute little vintagey cuff situation at the bottom. I didn't top stitch it all the way around, but I didn't want that cuff to kind of stay in place with more than just ironing. So I did some tacking stitches, enough that I can undo it super easily if I decide that I want to change how that cuff lays, like make it deeper or something. But for now, like, good enough, which is fantastic. I'm a fan. And with that, the pattern is done. I gave the whole thing a final good pressing, and here we are. Is she not so dang cute? Like, it is kind of funny how formal a set of overalls can read when you iron some nice pleats into the legs, you wear a collared shirt with it, you do up your hair and makeup. I feel like a very fancy lady in these overalls right now. I did also make the shirt that comes with the pattern, just a quick mock-up to try and see whether or not it was something that I liked and might be interested in making more of, and quick mock-up. It took me an entire day the whole day. But it was relatively paint by numbers, simple to make happen, and I'm sure that I could get faster and faster at them the more I've done it, because then I won't have to like understand the steps, I'll just already know them, right? But yeah, it has some nice features, like it's relatively nipped in at the waist because it's got front pleats and back pleats, and it has like just enough length after the waist to like nicely tuck into a skirt or pants like what come with the pattern, you know, without it like untucking super easily or creating a lot of bulk. I don't know, I feel like it's just right for the kind of blouse that you would want to be able to tuck into something, which is great, perfect, love it. It's also got a nice big pleat in the back, so it's got a lot of like stretch room and no hint of gaping at the bust without being like big everywhere else, which for me, like all of these, an absolute win. I could totally see myself making more of these. This is the same cotton that I used on the inside waistband down here that I got from Joann's. It was just an on sale remnant, and I figured why not, and there was just enough to make a shirt. So here we are. Yeah, I feel like in particular I'd love to make more of these out of the super cute like novelty prints, which amusingly enough is actually what Joann's was kind of good for, like a good novelty quilting cotton. Absolutely the kind of thing you could have gotten there. But alas, it is not meant to be. I did get a few more little final impulse purchase items from Joann's while I was there. I had a little gander down the patches aisle to see what sort of fun things they had. That you cannot see that very well at all. Well, anyway, I got some fun patches to play with because I feel like denim, it just calls for patches. Joann's was far from perfect. I feel like any big mega store like that is gonna inherently have a lot of issues. And I'm really hopeful that in their absence, a lot of super cute, niche, local community shops will pop up that are like bead stores and a quilting store, and the various things that you might have been able to buy at Joann's will now be available at smaller places. I mean, that's not an instant thing, that takes time, but that's like my hope for the future. But when I said earlier about stepping into Joann's and it feeling kind of magical, it's because I immediately felt the sense of being in just such a very inherently creative space. I think that any supply store, a hardware store, a gardening store, a kitchen supply store even, I feel like there's something so energizing and invigorating and motivating about being in a space that caters to the creation of something new, bought from the items purchased at that store, but still, like, I feel like it puts you in that space, and I love that so much. I also have a lot of very fond memories from my childhood of going to Joann's with my mom. I'd touch all the fabric, I'd look at all the buttons just like I do today, and even then one of my favorite sections was the patterning books, because I remember sitting there, and a lot of my earliest attempts at drawing were very clearly me just looking at the pattern book like cover people and drawing it, but like turning it into a dragon fantasy person or something. Thank you to anyone who has ever worked at a Joann's, by the way. I know firsthand how much working in a retail space can have its challenges. And I appreciate that you have been part of making this space, this particular creative space that I've known for so long, as wonderful an experience as you could. With all of that said and done, I think the only thing left to say is goodbye, Joann. I'll miss you, sort of.